for doing the Belmar. Okay, thank you, whoever that is. So a week ago, we had the opportunity to sponsor one of the holes at the Belmar opening, and we had we sponsored one of the hole-in-ones. And so Tracy and we come in, and Tracy's not a golfer, and I'm really not a golfer either. I get more strokes for my money than anybody in the world. And so she comes up to me and she says, "I'm not sure how to behave on the golf course." I said, "Just watch everybody else. It's okay. It's cool." So we're sitting there, and for some reason, one of the foursomes drives up, and she asks, and one of the guys gets on the tee, and he's getting ready to tee off, like this. And Tracy says, "What's his name?" And I'm thinking, that's a little odd, but it's okay. And the lady gives him his name, and his name's Jeff. And he's ready to tee off. And if you know my wife, Tracy, she's one of the most energetic, enthusiastic people that you ever met. And all of a sudden, in the middle of the silence, I hear my wife going, "Go, Jeff, go! Go, Jeff, go!" And I mean, it stunned everybody. And I went, "Tracy, this is not Lambeau. Okay, we don't do that on the tee." And so already we got off to a rousing start with Belmar last week. So you guys, I want to talk about a subject today, and I really want this to be a discussion about rehumanizing leadership in today's world. For decade upon decade upon decade, leadership has been defined as what you do and how well you do it. Leadership has been defined by leader as knowing and doing. Does that make sense? Whoever had the most knowledge became the leader. Whoever did things the best or the most became the leader. And so leadership was defined by achievement. And all of that has changed. Today, the shift has been from leader as doer or leader as doing to leader as being. And today, the reason why people follow you is not because they are enamored by your accomplishments. They follow you for one reason. Who are you? And as a result, leadership has shifted from leader as doer to leader as being. Does that make sense? And as a result of that, there are two factors that have caused that major sociological shift. One factor is the increase of technology. Technology is everywhere, all over. And so one of the things that futurists predicted as early as 1960, who saw the impact of technology upon the human psychic that no one was anticipating. And the principle was this: as exposure to technology increases, intimacy decreases. As exposure to technology increases, intimacy decreases. Why is that? Think about that. Intimacy is what the futurists told us was every time you remove a face-to-face interaction and replace it with a numbing, neutral machine interaction, you begin to transform the brain and what people's expectations are. Does that make sense? So 30 years ago, we had this new phenomenon. You didn't go into the bank to see the teller. You went for the first time where? to the drive-through. And boy, was that a massive thing. And yet, and then you didn't go to the drive-through, you went to where? ATM. And wow, what happens today? You stay home and you click a button. We also know we've seen it in the last 2 years in an accelerated fashion, that you can stay at home through technology and never come to work in a physical space and still be highly productive. Is that fair? What is the impact? What is the impact of a team that's trying to work that's not engaging with each other? What have you guys seen? Dean, Marie, what have you seen? It's hard to collaborate. Why do you lose your culture? Or you have to work really, really hard to keep it. Why is that? Talk to me, you guys. I've seen you guys in processes and you are not shy. So you're not getting away with that today. One of the things that we know is, so every time you remove a human interaction with technology, it takes intimacy out of our lives, and intimacy is the stuff, relationships. Intimacy is the core of relationships, right? Well, the second factor that's caused this is the rise of millennials and then Yers and then Zers. 70% of the workforce today insists that they have changed the definition of what it means to gain trust in a relationship. My doctorate was in understanding generational differences and how each generation gives trust. How do I trust a brand before I purchase it? How do I trust a source for information before I believe it? How do I trust a leader before I commit to following that leader? Make sense? And what the millennial generation and then the Yers and then the Zers have all said is they have said, we are changing the definition or the criteria of what is trust, of what has to happen before we give trust. And it's this: do you care about me? Because it used to be, I will trust you if you have more knowledge than I do. What blew that out of the window? What blew that out of the water? What technology has blown the differential of what you know and what I don't know? What even that playing field? Internet. Google. It's even more. And so as a result of that, anybody has access to any information instantaneously. And so knowledge is no longer a definer in whether I trust you or not. As a result of that, what the latter three generations that fill today's workforce have insisted upon is that we want continuity between our professional lives and our personal lives. My generation, by the way, 90% of what I was taught as the core criteria of a leader 30 and 35 years ago, 90% of that has needed to be discarded. It's no longer relevant. And so if you're going to be relevant as a maturing leader, you have got to change your understanding of what leadership is today. And the millennial generation has rejected, and the Xers and the Yers, they have rejected the notion that personal is personal and business is business. When I was growing up and I was entering the workforce, and I would have a crisis going on in my family, or I had a really bad week, what was the expectation when I walked in the door? The moment I walked in the door at work, what was the expectation? Say it again. You leave it behind, don't bring it here. And so to function as a leader for many, many years meant you basically had to wear a mask. And the notion was, in order to be successful, you have to live a divided life. In order to be successful, you have to become somebody that your children don't know. You have to become somebody here that your wife or husband did not marry. The values and the behaviors at work are different than the values at home. Well, you know what? The latter three generations said, because they have a different understanding of integrity. Integrity is not only a moral thought or an ethical thought like it is to boomers, it's also an identity. And so integrity for 70% of leaders and the people that you lead, integrity is this: are you the same person at home as you are here? Will your 6-year-old recognize how you behave here as they do there? They do not want a divided life. They want what is called true work-life balance. True work-life balance is not like a teeter-totter, where if you give so much work, time to work, this at home gets impacted. If you're given so much time at home, work gets impacted. That has been the traditional notion of work-life balance. Oh, guess what is now the number 2 factor in whether I take a job or not? What do you think is? What is that company's commitment to what? Work-life balance. Oh, the number 1 is culture. How do they treat people? And number 3 is compensation. And so getting back to this, the notion of life balance is different now. It's like 2 flowing rivers. You have personal and you have professional. And when you have life balance, it means that you are loving both sides of the equation. It means that when you're loving being at work so much that it feels like play. How many of us have ever had a job that it was nothing more than a grind of watching the clock from the moment that we got there? It is monotony and quiet torture. Well, we know that if there's work-life balance, work feels like play. It doesn't feel like a job, and the hours move like this, and the seasons move like this. Oh, and if you have something that needs to be done on the weekend, or a report that needs to be done in the evening, it's not a pattern. But if something needs to be done and you know that it's an unusual circumstance, you'll say to your son or your daughter or your spouse or your significant other, look, I can't do that with you all tonight because I've got a report that's due tomorrow. And they understand because it's not a part of the pattern. Because when you come home, they see you present all the rest of the time. And at the same time, when you're at work and your son has a ball game, or your daughter has a certificate that she's going to receive at school, in today's workforce that generates high trust, what's the expectation? What's the expectation? You better go. You better be there because that's a memory that you're going to miss that you'll never have an opportunity again. And so the message that we're getting today is today's workforce insists on the human side of leadership. They want a culture where I am not a means to an end. I am respected, I'm valued, I'm appreciated, and so are the commitments that I make to other precious people in my life. What are you guys thinking? What's going on in your head? It does sound a lot like Belmark. And so as a result, you're able to be present at home. and you're able to be fully present and engaged at work. However, let me say this. One of the things that we're teaching younger leaders around the country is this. With that kind of autonomy and trust that's given to you comes responsibility. The higher the level of autonomy that's given to you, and the higher the level of a commitment of work balance, that means that we're treating you like adults and we're respecting all of your adult commitments, right? But that also means that we expect you to be productive and effective. With autonomy and high flexibility come responsibility. That's the only way it can work. Does that make sense? And so today the shift has been, if I'm going to be effective as a leader, bottom line, relationships with your people have got to be first. Relationships with your people have got to be first. Now, let me say this. Relationships with your people doesn't guarantee success. Relationships with your people doesn't guarantee you're going to get that order out the door, meeting all the specs within the time frame that you promised it would be delivered, and delivered on time without being damaged. Relationships don't guarantee that. But let me ask you this. If you would have a worker or a teammate who comes to work, and that day their boss met them and said, "How you doing? Hey, we need to have coffee. In fact, I've got 20 minutes today. Why don't we find some time? I just want to check in. I want to see how things are going for you. I want to see how I can help you. And how's your daughter? And how's Cindy? And how's Susie? Oh, and that house you bought last week. How'd that go?" What's that convey? What's that convey? There's a person who cares about me. Now, a person who feels cared about being cared for is the foundation of trust today. Relationships do not guarantee success, but there is no success without engagement. There is no success without a passionate group of people coming together as teams, right? And so if there's no engagement, no success without engagement, and there's no engagement without relationship, authentic, vulnerable relationships, do you see the connection? That's the connection. I was working with a group of professional football coaches a few years ago. And one of the things that a number of the coaches in the NFL and general managers had asked me to do was this. Our coaches don't understand that the old way of leading players no longer works. The old way of, I'm the coach, I have 20 years of experience, you don't, I'm the boss, run the play the way I told you to run the play. I don't want your input before, during, or after. Shut up and run the play. In fact, if you do give me a lot of static before and after the play, I'm going to get tired of that and you may get cut. And so for years, leadership was about do what I say. I was teaching this notion of leadership as being human first. Gang, one of the most important things that you can do as a leader is what we call, my former mentor, John Maxwell, once said this: leadership by walking around is one of the most wise investments of time that you can make. Leadership by walking around. You get away from your desk, you get up, and you just start walking around. With intentionality. You're looking, because let me tell you something. Every person that comes to work has a story. Every person that comes to work has some level of pain going on in their life. Every single person. Every single person has a problem. Would you agree with that? By the way, if you raise your hand and repeat the Dr. Fred mantra. Ready? I got problems. You got problems. But the biggest problem is the person seated next to me. Just a thought. We all have problems. And you guys, one of the marks of caring is, I want to know what's going on in your life. Now, we were taught that that's weakness. We were taught that that's soft. We were taught that that's foo-foo, touchy-feely, kumbaya. You know what my experience is? Anybody who discounts what we're talking about with these kinds of say, oh, this is kumbaya crap. Oh, this is touchy-feely stuff. I've never seen anyone say that who had a commitment or the ability to engender genuine relationships. I've never seen that. The ones that are always the skeptics are the ones who don't see the value of it or incapable of creating authentic relationships in the workplace. 50% of all leaders are incapable of moving from what we call level 1, which is leadership by command and my way or the highway. 50% of leaders cannot move off of that place and move to leadership through relationships. 50%. And the reason for that is they do not have the ability to build relationships with others, and they don't have the ability to build a relationship with themselves. And as a result, the only way that they know how to lead is through telling, not teaching, command, not mentoring. And the idea of vulnerability scares them to death. You with me? So the pillars of leadership today are no longer knowledge, it's no longer position, and it's no longer experience or competence. The pillars of leadership today are authenticity. Are you for real? Are you who you say you are in all aspects of your life? 2, are you transparent? Are you telling me all the information? And 3rd, vulnerability. Do I know you and do you want to know me? Did you hear that? Vulnerability is, do I know you and do you want to know me? Without vulnerability, there is no trust as a leader in today's culture. People will only follow you if you refuse to be vulnerable. They will not follow you beyond the context of your job description. You know how you can tell a leader has exceeded their job description, and that's all they have is their job description? Is when people say to that leader, when that leader wants them to do something, to say, that's not my job description. That's out of my job description. Now, there's either 1, 2, you've got a very poor teammate, or you've got a poor leader who has not engendered the depth of respect and trust and engagement from his workforce. Make sense? So I was working with these coaches, and I was teaching this. And I was teaching these coaches that if you're going to reach today's player, first of all, they don't care about your scheme. They will not buy into your scheme until they know that you care about them and you respect them and you include them in input. Did you hear what I just said? That you respect them, that you care about them, and you include them in input. Hey, James, I really care about you. I really respect you. But there is just a bunch of information that I just don't think you can handle. What did I just told you? What did I just tell you? Did you hear that? I just said, I didn't tell him he doesn't matter. I just said, I'm not going to give him any information. What James just did is show the psychological shift that has occurred with your teammates that did not exist with your mom and dad or your grandparents. And that was, you will be told on a need-to-know basis. And back then, leadership was about true power was information withheld. The person who had the knowledge to the exclusive relationship, exclusive knowledge, had the leg up on everybody else. With me? Today, leadership is not about information withheld. Leadership is about information shared. And with that, I have to trust you that if I'm going to take a risk and share information with you, you're going to be respectful of me and not use that information in a way that's detrimental to me or to anybody else. Make sense? And so today, it used to be when I was a young leader, when a leader would say, look, just do it. And I don't have to tell you why, just do it. I didn't like it, but I was taught, what do you do? If someone said, jump 5 feet and do it, and I don't have to tell you why, what did you do 30 years ago, Dean? You jumped, whether you liked it or not, because we didn't have an infrastructure, an economic infrastructure in our country at that time, that we didn't have 6 job opportunities that we could ghost 4 of the interviews. If we didn't like it, we quit. Back then, if you quit, you may not find another job. Make sense? And so today, the shift has been, I may not like it, I'll do it, and I will comply. But what James just did is that when I ask someone today, tell someone today that I don't want your input and I don't want your ideas. Hi guys. You may want to walk around. Hey, this is one of the reasons why we have a dry run. As you see Abby running up and down the side like a hamster. Where was I before I was so rudely interrupted by myself? So today, not only do you not like it, but you will feel disrespected to your core. Because today's generation of workers, what tool have you used all of your life whenever there was an exchange of information or something that involved learning? What tool? Mine was a book. There was no interaction. What is it today? It's a computer. And when there is exchange of information, is it one way? It's always interactive. We call it the joystick generation. And so as a result of that, I have been wired from 2 to 3 years old now that whenever there is an information exchange, I am part of it. That's all I know. That's my reality. And now, 18, 20 years later, I now enter the workforce and I run into a level 1 leader who says, do it. And I don't have to tell you what to do it. Just do it. I don't have the time. We got a crisis going on. Just do it. How will that young teammate react? How will they react?
Not well.
Why? And so what were the first word coming out of their mouth when someone gives them a directive? What will be? Why? And my generation was taught, if you ask why, it's what? Insubordination or disrespectful. What I say to leaders today in the back half of their career, if you have a younger leader or teammate who is asking you why, you better understand that that is a sign that they're still engaged with you. If they quit asking you why, you're done. They just haven't told you. And so back to that coach, I was teaching these coaches, and there was a coach from the New York Giants who, running back coach. And he raises his hand from the back of the room and he starts going like this. He's got two Super Bowl rings, one on this hand, one in this hand, one in front of his wedding ring, if that tells you anything. And he's doing this. And I call on him and he says, this is a bunch of BS. He didn't use the initials, but he said, this is a bunch of BS. The only thing that I need to be a leader around here are these two Super Bowl rings. What was he saying? Leadership is about your accomplishments. Leadership is about your position. Leadership is about what you've done. What he didn't know was at the end of the season, he would be fired. He would be the only person on his staff, on that staff at the end of that season that would be fired. You know why he was fired? Because the exit interviews at the end of the season from the players in his position room revealed, we're not following that guy. We don't believe in that guy. We don't care. We don't care about his schemes. We don't care about his knowledge. And here's what one of them said, because he don't care about us. Now, in the old days, that would have gotten you laughed off of an NFL team. Today, if you're not that kind of leader, you will not gain the engagement of your players. Does the same thing apply to you at Bellmark? Exactly the same thing. So what we've seen that's really critical when you're leading younger leaders who demand and expect and all they want a human, compassionate workplace. It's very clear that you provide care and compassion. That means as a leader in development, you have to be working on who all the time? On yourself. That's why leadership development is so difficult today. Before, you had to know your craft, the technical side, and you had to know your responsibilities, and that would make you a great leader. Today, you have to know yourself. You got to know your warts. You got to know what your triggers are. You got to know what you look like when you're in an environment that you don't feel respected. We have an assessment that we call, and some of you have taken it, and there's it talks about your backup style. Your backup style are those characteristics that you start leaning on in your behavior or in your thinking patterns when you're tired, when you're exhausted, when you have lost faith in an environment, or you don't feel safe, respected, or appreciated or included in that environment. Whenever a leader does not feel, a person does not feel safe in a work environment, they will go to what we call their backup style. And their backup style are those behaviors that we learned as kids to survive emotionally, but as adults, they begin to backfire on us. And so how many times as a leader have you thought that it felt like you were babysitting? You ever felt that way? The whole room, for those of you who are on screen, the whole room is smiling. Let me give you a little thought. You are. That's exactly what you're doing. And so let me give you a thought. Your task as a leader, another word for the backup, your backup style is your child mode. And we use backup style because it doesn't feel as touchy-feely to some hardline leader. But it's really your child mode. It's the child side that all of us have that we revert to when we don't feel safe. The side of us that feels it needs to be protected. And gang, I don't know about you, but I've walked into many a boardroom where there was zero trust. And it felt like I was dealing with a bunch of children fighting in the sandbox over the truck. You ever seen that? And so your job as a leader is to keep the kids home. Your job as a leader is to keep the kids home. You know, how do you keep the kids home? How do you keep the kids home and keep the adult showing up? How do you do that? What do you think? Let's test that. If you know that the kid comes out when people don't feel safe or included, and safety means respected, heard, valued, and communicated to. Did you hear that? People who don't know what's going on will feel left out. And people who feel left out will not feel safe. And people who will not feel safe will not be engaged because the kid is showing up that says, don't trust, keep it at a distance. And so I will say this, you cannot create a safe environment where adults show up in a non-consensus environment. You cannot create a safe environment in a non-consensus work style. Because consensus, by the way, is not does everybody agree before we move on. Consensus is, look, as the leader of this team, I have to make a decision that I'm accountable for to the rest of the organization. And I've got to make the best decision as quickly as possible. Now, before I do that, I need all the input. And gang, I just want you to know at the end of this hour, I've got to make a decision. I'm just letting you know that. In fact, right now, I'm leaning in this direction. But before I make that decision, I need your input. I need you to show me if I am making the right move or not. Or is there a move I'm not even considering? And gang, we need to talk quickly and we need to talk authentically and we need to be real with each other because I've got to make a decision. That's consensus. Consensus is not the decision, it's the process of gaining input and putting things on the table that influence a healthy decision. Does that make sense? And so you all, let me just say this and I'll open it up for questions. You can, if you want an engaged team that's all in with you, you've got to be committed to a consensus environment. You are not going to develop a consensus environment if you are insecure about being disagreed with or getting pushback. You have to be a mature leader to receive pushback and not take it as they're talking about my mama and they're rejecting me. Takes a real mature person. That's why you've got to constantly be working on you and your emotional growth. Abby, you have a question?
Yes, I do. A couple comments here from our online audience, and then we can open up to the local audience here. So Phil shared earlier, the same thing applies to teachers in classrooms with students. Teachers are not the knowledge brokers they used to be. All the information students need to know is in the palm of their hand each day. The job has changed dramatically.
Yeah.
Susan shared, the challenge is leading the mixed workforce, bringing all generations along, keeping the I will do what you tell me to do generation and the why generation all engaged in a meeting. Listening, respecting, and caring about your crew goes a long way in making it possible. Thanks for reminding us of this. Paul shared such an important point a moment ago. Leaders who engage with others, who provide care and compassion, understand the importance of self-work. Greg shared, I like this distinction of consensus versus either dictatorship or democracy. That is helpful to both the leader and the team. And then just one more, and we can open it up here. Regarding the balance conversation, most people aren't disciplined, so they do what feels good, and a lot of people are lazy. Do you try to get the lazy employees to talk about why they are lazy or how to fix that?
That's a great question. Should we take a break right now? Let me say this. You can't motivate anybody. You cannot motivate anybody. You believe that? Motivation is always the result of an inside choice. Now, as a leader, I can raise the odds that they may choose to motivate themselves by my example and by my coaching and by my positive accountability. But ultimately, motivation is an internal choice. Now, if I've got a leader a person on my team who's lazy, what that means is they are not meeting their potential, they're not fulfilling their talent, and they are letting down teammates. And as a result, you have got to have a conversation about that. You have got to have a conversation with that person. And ultimately, what I have found is that if that has been their life pattern, they don't know they're being lazy. And so what has to happen? You got to have a conversation. And you got to have not only a conversation of why this isn't acceptable, but this is where we need to go. And how are we going to do this together? If you are conflict averse as a leader, you're not going to have that conversation. One of the things that's one of the most caring things that you can do as a leader that's really being human is having the hard conversations in which you deliver the last 5%. Some of us remember that. What is the last 5% of a conversation?
The hard part.
It's the hard part. It's the reason why we needed to have the conversation first. And I'll ask people, hey, did you have that conversation with so-and-so? And they'll say, well, kind of, sort of. What did they really mean? Nope, I didn't. The last 5% of the conversation is the hardest part of the conversation. It's when you're having that conversation and your heart is beating out your chest. It's when you're having that conversation and this message between this 6 inches is saying, don't do it, don't do it. There may be consequences. They may get upset. They may cause drama. They may not like you. You're saying this to the wrong person. Can you guys identify? And we back off the last 5%. But gang, often I have found the last 5% conversation is the act of true caring. Some of the most difficult conversations that people have ever had with me were the ones that at the moment I hated it. It left me feeling like a puppy with my tail between my legs. But 20 years later, I can remember that conversation now, and it was one of those game changers for me. Part of being a true compassionate leader in today's workforce is you got to communicate well, you got to build consensus, but you also have to have those caring conversations. And just because someone is uncomfortable with your conversation does not mean you are being inappropriate or that you are being wrong in what you're doing. Leaders learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Make sense? So being caring is often giving information to someone that you'd rather not give. But if you're a true friend, you're going to give it to them because they're making a fool out of themselves and they're the only one who doesn't know it. Make sense? Any other comments or questions? We've got a couple of minutes before we wrap it up. Yes, ma'am.
Could you comment on the relationship between failure and how failure is good for your culture and a caring relationship from a manager, and how if you care about your employees, they're going to move faster, learn faster, they're not going to be afraid to fail, and the positive impact that has.
Marie, that's a great point. We're working right now with a young leader in another state who he is a leader by doing, and he sees failure as an indictment. And so when one of his teammates makes a mistake, first of all, he gets really upset because he thinks that's a reflection on him. And he comes down on that leader, don't do this again. And guess what? That leader won't do it again because they won't get up to the plate the next time and they won't swing. Part of being a caring leader is using failure as an accelerated tool for growth, not as an indictment that you're not good enough. And that is the difference between perfectionism and a commitment to excellence. When there is a mistake, when you are a doing-based leader, you shame someone into not making a mistake. When you are a compassionate leader who wants to mentor and teach, you take that mistake, you talk about it, you put it on the table, but you say, now what are we going to do to learn from this? How do we turn this moment into something that's really powerful? Make sense? That is part of being a human, a compassionate person in today's leadership. And listen, leadership is far more difficult than ever before. All the stuff, we probably talked about 30 different disciplines in the last 45 minutes. And that is why I appreciate every one of you being here today and those of you who are on the screen, because your being here on a Friday morning at 7:30 conveys a hunger. It conveys that you haven't arrived. It conveys that I want to be the best that I can be, and I want to be the best steward of my gifts. And I thank you for each one of you being here today. I hope it's been helpful. If there's one nugget that you've walked away with, just get a couple of you. Give me a nugget that you've walked away with today that's helpful for you as a leader. James.
The consensus environment, if you do not create that environment, there will be consensus, but it's going to be without you. And it may happen through destructive gossip, creating instability.
You need to go on the road with me, James. And James, you said that just like what we practiced before the session. You were awesome. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
For me, it was the why. I think sometimes I explain the why, but what I'm taking is to say to my team, if you don't understand the why, if I haven't explained it well enough, ask me, to almost extend that to them to say, ask me more.
That's powerful. So you're sharing that the emphasis used to be upon the what and the how. Today it's on the why and the where. Why are we doing this and where are we going with this? That's a key shift in leadership today. And it requires you to communicate and be mentoring and teaching. And that takes time, and you got to do it over and over and over. Even when this little voice is saying, how many times do I need to tell you? Today, it's about over communicating the why and the where. Has this been helpful? Thank you for being our guest today. Thank you for being with us as we're in our dry run. For the first time, we're using our new space, and it's a real honor to have you. And thank you for all of you who are online with us today. I hope it's been helpful. Have a great week, you guys.